Title: Clone Me, Baby. Chapter 1: The Breaking Point. David Greenwald, a 38-year-old office worker, was tired. And not just any kind of tired, the kind of tired that comes with living a life of mind-numbing repetition. His job as an accountant at a dreary firm in downtown Boston was exactly the kind of soul-crushing existence he had feared as a child. Every day was the same: commute, clock in, sit at a desk, process numbers, and stare blankly at the clock until the end of the workday. The hours stretched long and painful, and his colleagues, though friendly, had nothing exciting to say except for complaints about the weather and the latest office gossip. David lived alone in a small, sterile apartment filled with things he didn't care about: a dusty bookshelf, a single plant he could never remember to water, and a vintage record player he hadn't used in months. He tried to fill the emptiness with hobbies: yoga, weekend pottery classes, and even an online book club, but nothing stuck. He felt trapped in a cycle of insignificance. One evening, after an especially grueling day at the office, David slumped onto his couch, scrolling aimlessly through his phone. That's when he stumbled across an article that caught his eye: The Future of Cloning Technology, What's Next? He had never seriously considered the possibility of cloning until that moment. But the more he read, the more intrigued he became. The article explained how scientists had perfected cloning techniques, though still experimental. Clones weren't perfect copies, but they could handle mundane tasks, replicate a person's physical abilities, and even take on jobs. It sounded like science fiction, but David was in no mood to dismiss ideas. He was desperate for a solution to the monotonous grind. He imagined a world where his clones could work at his job, run errands, and make money, all while he lived the life he'd always dreamed of: traveling, experiencing the world without constraints. That night, he made a decision. He went online, found a shady website selling at-home cloning kits, and, within hours, ordered one with expedited shipping. The price was steep, but David was done waiting for some grand epiphany. This was his moment. Chapter 2: The First Clone. The cloning kit arrived in a plain, unmarked box 2 days later. It was packed with vials, syringes, and a single instruction manual that looked more like a mad scientist's diary than a legitimate guide. But David was committed. He followed the instructions carefully, mixing chemicals in what looked like a small lab setup, which was a lot more complicated than he'd expected. As the chemicals reacted, the air around him hummed with an odd energy. Finally, after an hour of trial and error, David pressed the large red clone button on the machine. The chamber filled with a soft, glowing light, and the contents began to swirl. David held his breath. This was it. He was about to create a copy of himself. After what felt like an eternity, the light faded, and in front of him stood a man, his exact physical replica, albeit a bit groggy and disoriented. The clone blinked and looked around, his eyes slowly adjusting. "Hey," the clone said in David's voice, rubbing his temples. "What? Where am I?" David grinned, a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "You're me. I'm you. Well, technically, you're my clone." The clone staggered forward, glancing down at his hands. "This is strange. I'm real. I mean, I'm you." "Exactly," David said, his voice filled with pride. "You're me, but you can do everything I don't want to do. I'm sending you to work at the office. You'll take over my job, while I'm going to live my life." The clone furrowed his brow. "Wait, what? You want me to go to your job? I don't even know what you do." David handed him a set of clothes, his own work outfit, and a briefcase. "It's simple. Just be me. Do what I do. And I'll take care of the rest." The clone, still slightly confused, agreed. "Fine. I'll do it. But I have no idea how to even use a printer." David laughed. "You'll figure it out. Now go, I've got a flight to catch." He grabbed his backpack and rushed out the door, already feeling the excitement of freedom washing over him. With a deep breath, he stepped onto a plane bound for Bali, ready to begin his new life of leisure. Chapter 3: Cloning Chaos. The first clone, now referred to as Clone 1, was quickly thrown into the deep end at the office. David had provided him with all the necessary paperwork and had written down the basic details of his job, But the reality was far more complicated than the clone had imagined. He sat at the desk, surrounded by stacks of financial documents and a buzzing fax machine, feeling completely out of his depth. Okay, Clone 1 muttered to himself. How hard can this be? He opened the first file. It was a report on a major account, something David had dealt with for months. Clone 1 stared at the numbers. They didn't make sense. The spreadsheet had columns and rows of figures that seemed to multiply by themselves. The meetings were equally confusing, with colleagues asking him questions about things David had never mentioned. Back in Bali, David had a different set of problems. While he was enjoying the sun and the gentle waves, sipping on a coconut drink, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety about his plan. What if Clone 1 messed everything up? What if his office was a complete disaster by the time he returned? But the beach was too beautiful to worry. David spent the day exploring, knowing that when he got back, he'd be able to enjoy his clone's earnings while living a life of freedom. Meanwhile, Clone 1 had spent the past 2 hours trying to figure out how the photocopier worked. It made a horrible sound when he tried to print out documents. His anxiety skyrocketed as the printer began to spew paper everywhere. Chapter 4: The Clone Economy. While Clone 1 was struggling to figure out office equipment, Clone 2 was having a vastly different experience. David had sent him to a small town in Texas to handle real estate investments. David had promised him it would be easy, buy property, rent it out, and make a profit. Simple, right? What David didn't tell Clone 2 was that he had no idea how to actually buy property, let alone navigate the world of real estate. Clone 2 quickly found himself overwhelmed by the local customs and had no clue what the difference between a ranch and a residential plot was. At one point, he found himself at an auction bidding on a dilapidated barn with no real understanding of why he was doing it. But in a twist of fate, Clone 2's apparent incompetence led to an accidental stroke of genius. The barn, it turned out, was sitting on an oil-rich patch of land. A local drilling company bought the property off of him at a huge markup, turning Clone 2 into a real estate mogul almost overnight. Meanwhile, Clone 3 was busy in Tokyo, running his own sushi restaurant. David had given him vague instructions to make it cool and serve sushi in a new way. Clone 3 took it to heart, installing a conveyor belt system for sushi, but with one significant twist: the sushi was delivered by tiny robot arms. The restaurant became an overnight sensation, not because of the food, which was mediocre at best, but because of the novelty of robotic sushi delivery. People lined up for hours just to take a photo with the robots. Chapter 5: The Meltdown. As David stood in his luxury hotel room in Bali, the phone continued to buzz in his hand. He stared at it, a sinking feeling in his stomach. The tropical breeze that had been so refreshing now felt oppressive. His carefree vacation was at risk of unraveling before his very eyes. He quickly answered the call. David. Clone 1 was nearly shouting. You don't understand. The boss wants to fire you. Apparently, you've been slacking off lately. I don't even know what a quarterly forecast is. I've been doing everything wrong. David ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. All right. First of all, don't panic. You're me. You've been working there long enough. Just act like you know what you're doing. But I don't know what I'm doing. Clone 1 replied, his voice cracking. I don't even know how to read these financial reports. I spent 2 hours today staring at a spreadsheet thinking it was a map. David let out an exasperated sigh. Fine. Just keep them busy. I'm coming back. But don't let them know it's a total disaster. I'll help you when I get back. With that, David hung up the phone, his sense of relaxation slipping further away. He packed his things hastily and booked a return flight to Boston for the next day, hoping his clone could hold things together for at least a few more hours. Back at the office, Clone 1 was standing in front of a half-finished presentation. He had no idea what he was even supposed to be presenting. The slides were filled with numbers that seemed to make no sense, and the charts looked like something out of a bad art class. I need a miracle, Clone 1 muttered, pacing around David's desk. He stared at the calendar on the wall. Meeting with the boss in 30 minutes. What am I even going to say? Meanwhile, David's other clones had their own set of issues. Clone 2, still residing in Texas, was getting more and more confused by the day. He had made his accidental fortune in real estate, but he felt like a fraud. What did he really know about land? What did he know about owning a ranch? He had become the talk of the town, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was all going to come crashing down. Clone 3, in Tokyo, had fallen headfirst into obsession with robots. He was now spending more time designing new types of robotic sushi delivery systems than actually running the restaurant. The food quality suffered as robot arms were given the task of serving sushi with questionable precision. The once popular restaurant started getting bad reviews online. Best sushi, if you don't mind getting poked by a robot, one review read. Clone 3 had no time to fix this. He was too busy building robot arms that could dance to jazz music. Chapter 6, The Clone Wars. David returned to Boston to find that his clones were in full-scale meltdown mode. Clone 1, despite his best efforts to keep the office running smoothly, had made a colossal mistake. In an attempt to impress the boss, he accidentally sent a confidential financial report to the wrong client. The fallout was immediate. David's boss, a no-nonsense woman named Carol, was livid. "I can't believe this, Greenwald." Carol snapped as Clone 1 tried to explain. "How did you manage to mess up something so basic? Are you even paying attention to your work? This is the third time this month." Clone 1's heart sank. "I'm so sorry, Carol. I've just been a little distracted. I'm not feeling well." Carol, looking unimpressed, crossed her arms. "You've been distracted? You're telling me you've been sick for a week now? How long are we supposed to put up with this, huh?" Before Clone 1 could come up with an answer, Carol's eyes narrowed. "I think it's time for a little vacation, Greenwald. I'm putting you on probation. We'll see how things go from here." The clone's stomach dropped. He knew he had to fix things fast, but how? Back at Clone 2's ranch, the situation was equally absurd. He had accidentally bought land that was completely useless, 2 acres of dry, barren desert with no water supply. But in a strange twist, the locals didn't mind. They thought he was some kind of genius. One of the cowboys had even convinced Clone 2 to host a rodeo on his new property. The event was a disaster, with Clone 2 getting thrown off a mechanical bull within minutes. But somehow, the press got wind of it, and the quirky nature of the event made it a viral sensation. Now, every time Clone 2 went into town, people greeted him like a celebrity. "Hey, Mr. Ranchman, great bull riding," they'd yell. Back in Tokyo, Clone 3 was dealing with his own mini-crisis. The robots he had designed were getting out of control. They weren't just serving sushi anymore. Some had started rolling around the restaurant delivering drinks, and others were going rogue, unplugging the electric sushi grills and trying to dance on their own. The restaurant's kitchen looked like a war zone. "Okay, I might have overdone it with the robots," Clone 3 said, observing the chaos with a bemused expression. "But come on, dancing sushi robots. How cool is that?" But as customers began to leave, clutching their forks in confusion, Clone 3 realized something. Maybe he had taken the whole innovative sushi concept a bit too far. It wasn't even sushi anymore, it was an interactive robot experience.